Good morning, everyone. Hey, welcome. I hope that we can continue to enjoy outdoors the next couple weeks. Of course, who knows, the advanced forecast is usually worthless, but the next 2 Sundays don't look quite this nice. Unless you enjoy 90-degree temperatures. By the way, Twyla and I will be gone the next 2 weeks, not because of the 90-degree temperatures, but because we had other things planned. So I will, though, my heart will go out to you back here. It's been an interesting week. I was telling somebody the other day that I had 3 phone calls this week from people telling me that people that had disappeared from, that I was in contact with, 2 of them anyways, had disappeared, and I wondered what happened to them. And 3 people called this week to tell me they had COVID, along with their family members or their coworkers. I think there were of the total people that called me, 17 people, either themselves or their family members had COVID, which I now think I know more people that had COVID than any other time in the whole crisis, which is also kind of fascinating. One of the guys was a guy that the Amish had convinced the 2 of us to drive them out Midwest last week. Fortunately, the conference that they were going to got canceled, or who knows where I'd be today. Anyways, enough of that. I don't know where you all are in this world and where you are as far as being discouraged or encouraged or any of those things. But one of the things that I wanted to look at today was a little bit about encouragement and how we find encouragement. And actually it's going to end up being a character study as well, which I didn't plan for that to be when I looked at the topic, but that's the way it fell. I have no idea, but lately ESPN UK, which I didn't even know there was an ESPN in the United Kingdom, but they've been posting on my Twitter feed, which I still don't know how that's possible, but I'm sure that somehow they're promotions. But this last week they've decided to promote these, they've been posting these inspirational videos of people doing things and overcoming things that they didn't think they could do. And the one that really caught my attention this week was a young boy who was in a martial arts class, and he was trying. The goal that week was to break pieces of wood with your hand, both of your hands, and he did the one with his right hand really well. And his left hand, whenever he tried to do it with his left hand, he couldn't do it, and so then he started to cry. And the martial arts instructor, who was African American, the little kid was African American as well. And so he was talking about it's okay to cry. He said, I cry too when I can't get things that I want to do when I can't do them. And so he was telling him it's okay to cry, doesn't mean you can't do it. And sometimes we have to do things even when they hurt. And he talked then about how this makes you a better person and helps you face the struggles that you're going to face, again, because he's African American. He said that you're going to face as an African American male, and this is going to help you in that. And so the kid cried and cried and cried, and finally he was able to break it with his left hand. And the boys in the back timidly started to clap. I'm sure that they didn't know for sure whether they could clap or not. But encouragement is amazingly helpful. There's been a lot of psych research done on encouragement. Let's imagine, here's one of the classic studies that was done. Let's imagine that researchers have given you a series of really hard, ridiculous puzzles that you have to do, and you're struggling to get them done. And then suddenly, you get this note handed to you by one of the experimenters, the assistants of the experimenter, it's a note from Steve. And I don't know how Steve got to be there, not the Steve that we know. Maybe it was, I don't know. But Steve, they got a note, and they said, hi, my name is Steve, and I'm working on these puzzles too, and here's what I found to be helpful. And you get to read what Steve found to be helpful. Now, here's the amazing thing. Steve's advice is horrible. It does not help you at all. It's wrong advice. It's bad advice. But guess what? When people get a note from Steve that said, hey, I'm working on these puzzles and here's what you should try, people work harder, they work longer, and they're more successful at solving the problems when they don't get a note. The crazy part for me is that we are encouraged when we get encouragement that's horrible from people that we don't know. What can be more helpful than that? Not much. But what must that mean then when we get encouragement from people that we do know well and that they are giving us things that are actually helpful? what research seems to find is that we benefit from being with people who are in the same mess as we are. And that is somewhat encouraging in and of itself, which again reminds me of how Jesus says that the Bible tells us that Jesus was tempted in every way just like us. He was there with us. He can identify. He's like Steve. He's working on the same problem, except he doesn't give us bad advice. The question that we have for today is, can we all be encouragers, or are there some people that can be encouragers and there's other people who can't? I don't know. That's a good question. This year, 2 students who graduated gave me a gift. It was called they gave me a coffee mug, and it says on it, "I am an optimistic pessimist. I'm absolutely convinced that things will get worse." Maybe there are some people that are so pessimistic that they can't offer encouragement. Maybe that's possible. I don't know, but we'll see. Let's start in the book of Acts, and we're going to look at someone in the book of Acts who is known as an encourager. And again, this is where it became a character study that I didn't plan for it to be. We're going to start out in Acts 4, verse 36 and 37. And I'm going to be reading from the NIV. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas. Barabbas is another guy. Barnabas, which means the son of encouragement, sold a field that he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. Now, of course, here in the book of Acts, what we're talking about here is when the apostles and all the Christians shared everything in common, and at times people would sell what they have and bring it into the common pot that the church used at the time. And I'm not going to talk about whether we should do that or not. That's a whole different topic. But here's the part that's interesting. This is the only time in the Bible that we actually know that Barnabas' real name is Joseph. Other than that, he is never referred to by his real name ever again. He's only referred to by his nickname from the rest of the time on. Many of you have had a nickname sometime in your life. Most of your nicknames aren't as positive as the one that Barnabas had. Most of them are given to us by our peers and our family members, and they're less than complimentary. I wasn't going to tell you one of my nicknames that my peers gave me at school, but then I was watching a video with Twyla again on social media, and the name of my nickname came up from the very same place it came. When I was a child in school, I weighed a bit more than I weigh now. And so because of my weight, people used to make fun of me because of being overweight, which I was clearly in elementary school. And so one of my classmates went down south and they went to Piggly Wiggly store. And so my nickname in middle school was Chuggly Wuggly Piggly Wiggly. You all that didn't go to school in the 1970s and 1980s, schools were a lot rougher back then. I tell my kids what happened in schools, and they say, that didn't really happen in public schools. And I said, oh, yes, it did, and a lot worse. So I don't know what nicknames you have. You can talk about them over lunch with your family. I'm sure that there are some that are really cruel and some that are less cruel, but probably not any that are quite as positive as Barnabas's was. Now, the part that was fascinating for me preparing for this is how often, I didn't even realize how often Barnabas was an encouragement as time went on. So let's go to a few chapters over to Acts 11. Acts 11, what we find in verse 19 is this. Now those who had been scattered by persecution that broke out when Stephen was killed traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, spreading the word only among Jews. Some of them, however, men from Cyprus and Cyrene, went to Antioch and began to speak to the Greeks, also telling them the good news about the Lord Jesus. The Lord's hand was on them, and a great number of people believed and turned to the Lord. The news of this reached the church in Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch. When he arrived, he saw what the grace of God had done, and he was glad and encouraged them all to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. He was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and a great number of people were brought to the Lord. So what we see here is that the church was expanding at this time. And it expanded out, and some of the people decided, let's go to the Gentiles. And so they went to the Gentiles and started to preach the gospel for the first time outside of the Jewish nation. And when the leaders in the church found out about this back in Jerusalem, they said, let us send Barnabas there. Now, I don't know if they knew that they needed encouragement, or if they just knew that they needed a leader. But look what he did when he got there in verse 23. When he arrived, he saw what the grace of God had done, and he was glad, and he encouraged them all to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. Here again, we see him living up to his nickname and providing people with encouragement to do right and to be faithful and to remain faithful to the calling that God had given them. But then, if you look at verse 25, look what else he did. Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught a great number of people. The disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. So after he gets done encouraging the people, he says, I'm going to go find Saul. Now here's the interesting part about Saul, you all. After the road to Damascus, and when he gets struck down and he sees the great light and he has this conversion, he comes back to the church, and we'll talk about that later on today. And then he disappears for about 8 years. The Bible doesn't tell us where he went or what he did. When you follow this historically, and you look at the historical evidence, it does appear that he was doing something ministry-wide, but the Bible doesn't tell us what he was doing. We have little clue to where he was. Barnabas, though, knew about him, and we're going to find this out again because that's going to come up later on. He knew where Saul was. And he goes and he says, you know what, this is a job for Saul. Whatever Saul was doing in that 8 years, we don't know. But this becomes, when Barnabas goes and gets him and says, again, I don't know what he was doing. I don't know if he went and he said, hey, Saul, Paul, by the way, same guy. Hey, we really need you over here in Antioch. Could you come and start your public ministry? Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is when Paul starts his public ministry. Would have Paul started his public ministry had he not been encouraged to do so by Barnabas? I don't know. But here's what we do know. It took Barnabas going and dragging him out of Tarsus to bring him here to begin his ministry. And they taught the people for 1 year. Now, by the way, Paul and Barnabas remained friends for a while. But then if we turn over 4 chapters later to Acts 15, we see that Barnabas' encouraging ways does not go well with Saul, now Paul. Acts 15, verse 36 to 40 is where I'm going to be reading next. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit the brothers in the towns where we preached the word of God and see how they are doing. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, another good name, with them. But Paul did not think it was wise to take him because he had deserted them in some town, and had not continued with them in the work. And there was a sharp disagreement, and they parted companies. Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus. Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we find out here, what I love about this is it shows you a lot about the personalities of Barnabas and Paul. Paul is much more of a prophet type. He would have been a great friend if you don't mind people speaking truth to you at all times, no matter when. And so Paul does not have time for John Mark. John Mark deserted them. It's interesting. A lot of people hypothesize, why did John Mark desert them? Some people believe he found that mission work was too hard. He got discouraged. He was a young man at the time. Maybe he was too immature. Paul said, come on. He wasn't there for us the last time. By the way, Zach and I, our youngest son, came home to live with us during COVID. He just left actually yesterday after 12 weeks of working from home. His workplace decided it was time for him to come back and work on site again. But we watched the Michael Jordan special the last couple weeks here, The Last Dance. I guess you could say Michael Jordan was an encourager, kind of like Paul. If you like people yelling at you and screaming at you, that's probably what Paul would do. But so I don't know if Paul was too intense for John Mark or what happened. But he couldn't last, and he went home. By the way, I didn't know until I was studying for this sermon, I had forgotten this, Barnabas and John Mark were cousins, according to another part of the scripture, which was I don't know, wow, how did I miss that all this time? But Barnabas said, you know what, I think there's something about John Mark that we can build on him, and we can help make him a better person than the person who left us. And Paul's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, I often wonder, what was the Lord's true will here? Who was right? Were they both right? It's interesting when you think about Paul and Silas and where they ended up. And Barnabas and John Mark, we don't know as much about that because the book of Acts tends to focus more on Paul. It also helps me to realize that just to be an encourager doesn't mean you always have to agree with everybody, because Barnabas does not agree with Paul. They have a parting of the way, and they go in completely different directions. We don't know for sure how long Barnabas and John Mark were together. We also know, but we do know, it seems that John Mark, or Mark as we know him, had a change of heart. Because some 10 to 12 to 15 years later, that young man who deserted wrote the book of Mark, the gospel that we now know. The other thing that I want to say about this is that when he left Barnabas, he found another mentor. And that mentor was Peter. Most people believe that the book of Mark is really Peter's story of his time with Jesus that he told John Mark when they hung out together. Ladies and gentlemen, in those 12 to 15 years after Paul said, I don't want anything to do with this guy, Mark matured in an amazing way. I believe that he matured through the mentoring and encouragement of Barnabas and Peter. In some ways, you all, could he have asked for a better mentor than Peter? The man who knew failure, the man who knew what it was like to desert the people that you loved the most at the most critical time. By the way, if you ever read the book of Mark, it sounds a lot like Peter, a man who's impulsive and has ADHD. And compared to the rest of the Gospels, you sail through the Gospels in the book of Mark. It's like immediately we were there, then we were there, and then we were there. Just like Peter before he got placed on Adderall. He never did that. I know, he could have. Here's the other interesting thing, ladies and gentlemen. Somehow Paul and Mark worked it out. Because I'm not going to read it today, but in Colossians 4:10 and Philemon's 24, Paul talks positively about Mark. And then, ladies and gentlemen, I love this. In 2 Timothy 4:11, this is Paul writing. This is Paul writing. 2 Timothy 4:11. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. He is helpful to me in my ministry. That is the complete transformation from a young man who couldn't do it to a man that Paul now finds helpful. Thank you to Barnabas and Peter. The Greek word that's used here for encouragement is parkaleo, which means to come alongside of, to offer one support, to counsel, and to strengthen or to encourage, to come up alongside of. One of the cool things that you sometimes get as a therapist is an opportunity to see people over the course of their lifetime. That's very rare, but occasionally you do. One of the first people that I ever saw when I moved here into Lancaster County in 1996 was a young college sophomore. We still see each other every so often. I don't see him for years, and then he reappears on my schedule, and I get to see him. And so I've now seen him from when he was 20 years old. He's now in his late 30s, which is hard to believe. He went from being a college kid to being father. Weirdly enough, he emailed me at 6:30 this morning after I wrote this. I hadn't heard from him for a while. But it's been fun to watch him grow throughout those years. He still has some of the same things that we talked about back in the 1990s. But he approached some of the things. He has changed so much. But it's been fun to watch him along the way and how that he has matured and how that he has grown from those days that I met him in the 1990s. But to be an encourager means to walk with people, to be there with them, and to be there for them when they need you. So how do we become encouragers? I'm going to talk about two things as I close. Number one, we have to speak. We have to be able to say words. You can't just have beautiful thoughts, but you have to be able to talk. Another passage in Acts, I'm going to skip back now a little bit to Acts 13. Acts 13, verse 13. From Paphos, Paul and his companions sailed to Pergia and another town that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, where John left them to return to Jerusalem. When they were there, they went to Antioch. On the Sabbath, they returned to the synagogue and sat down. After reading from the laws and the prophets, the synagogue rulers sent word to them, saying, "Brothers, if you have a message of encouragement for the people, please speak it." We have to speak if we're going to be encouragers. But ladies and gentlemen, how do we have to speak? We have to use our tongues. And James has an awful passage about our tongues. In James 3, starting with verse 2. By the way, listen to this passage of James. I'm always struck by it. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, get that. If you never do anything wrong in what you say, James says you're perfect. I'm sure that James knows that none of us follow that, and so that's why he can say that so plainly. Because then he goes on to say, anyone who never says at fault in what they say is perfect. They're able to keep their whole body in check. So what I take out of that is James is saying is you have enough power to control your tongue 24/7, 365. You're amazing. You can deny your body anything, because if you can do that, you're amazing. Verse 3, when we put a bit in the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take a ship as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by the strong winds, they are steered by a small rudder wherever the pilot wants them to go. Likewise, the tongue is the smallest part of the body, but it makes great boast. Consider what a great forest is set afire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a whole world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body and sets the whole course of one's life on fire. It itself sets on fire by hell. Man, James, what are you saying here? That our tongues are fed from the fire of hell? Our tongues, you are. They're so dangerous, but so powerful. They can both bring life and suck the life out of people. They can build up, but they can so easily destroy. We need to figure out how to use our tongues to set ships sailing versus burning down the world. The difference between building up and burning down is so close. They're just inches apart. It's so hard not to do it. Ephesians 4 says this, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful in building up others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." Ladies and gentlemen, that's so hard to do. You know where I think that's the hardest for people that know us the best and we love the most? That's where it's sometimes the easiest to speak harmful, hurtful things. I was struck this week in another therapy session that I was involved in, talking to a middle-aged man who was trying to figure out what to do on social media. And I think that if Paul rewrote this, he would probably say, "Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of our mouths or our fingers." How in the world do we manage not only what comes out of our mouths today, but what comes out of our fingers? Yeah, it's just tough. So number one, we have to speak words. Number two, we have to do actions. This again is found in Acts 9. This again is Barnabas, and this is Paul earlier in their lives. Acts 9, verses 29 or 26. When he came to Jerusalem, he's talking about Saul at this point, Paul tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, which I would be too. The man was killing them not too long ago. They were afraid of him, not believing he was a real disciple. By the way, what a great disguise. What a great way to kill people if you would have been Saul. Just to go undercover, pretend to be a Christian, right? And then join the Christians, figure out who they are. Then you could kill them so much better. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles. He told them how Saul on his journey had seen the Lord, and that the Lord had spoken to him, and how in Damascus he had preached fearlessly in the name of Jesus. So Saul stayed with them and moved about freely in Jerusalem, speaking boldly in the name of the Lord. He talked and he debated the Grecian Jews, and they tried to kill him. When the brothers learned of this, they took him to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. By the way, Tarsus is where he went. That's where Barnabas found him 8 years later. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the thing again that I want to say here is that being an encourager doesn't mean that you don't do confrontation and you don't do hard things, because Barnabas did something really hard here. He confronted people with some really hard truth. He's saying you shouldn't reject him. You shouldn't be fearful of him. He's on our side. And not only did he do that, he took as an insider and he brought him in, and he's putting his reputation on the line for Saul, because Saul could have been a traitor, right? And Barnabas is saying, I so believe this is genuine, that I'm going to bring this man in, and I am going to demonstrate that by doing acceptance and advocating or arguing for him in your presence. Sometimes to be an encourager means to take chances with people when that doesn't look like we should. Again, you are. Barnabas does this later with John Mark, right? Same thing, same pattern. Questions that I want to leave you with today is this. Who in your life needs you to speak words of encouragement into their life? Who in your life needs you to do actions of encouragement to help them when they may be discouraged? I don't know who that person is in your life, and I don't need to know. But there's got to be people in our lives who we can encourage. And again, encouragement doesn't mean that we always speak words that are flowery and sunny, but words that need to be spoken. Words that need to be spoken out of love and word. The building up of those lives. Father God, we do thank you for the example of Barnabas and his life and what he has done to be encouraging to those around him. Thank you so much for this courage to speak the truth. Father, help us to find ways to speak the truth in love to those around us so that we can build others up rather than tear them down. Father, forgive us when we slip with our tongues. As James talks about, you know how much trouble our tongues get us into. Forgive us for that, Father, but help us to be reformed and to be used by you. In your name.